Ladies and gentlemen, I introduce Manoj. I'm so excited that you're here, and you've been the co-founder of multiple different startups in San Francisco over 3 decades, which is more lifetimes than I've ever lived. And yeah, first I'd like to ask, what would you say is your unique expertise and skill sets that you have?
So, Elaine, first and foremost, thanks for interviewing me and having me and giving me this opportunity to spend a little bit of time with you and share some things that I've done, over, like you said, over the past 30 years, which makes me a little bit older, but I'm glad to share some of those experience. So, in terms of the kind of uniqueness, if I look at that right now, I think over the years, given my startup experience and what I've done and a lot of the experiences that I've had, now what I see myself doing is basically helping entrepreneurs, right? So I do quite a bit of that here in South Korea, as well as I teach a couple of classes in the United States at the university. I've been doing that for about 6 years right now. So it gives me the opportunity and the chance to work with a lot of different people, a lot of different ideas, a lot of different skill sets. And it's a huge learning experience for me as well. By teaching these classes, I also learn about what's going on in the world because it's almost impossible to keep up. So it's kind of a two-way street, but a lot of it has been helping people with their ideas and helping them build their own companies, and basically to an extent encouraging them along the way, right? I kind of find it quite interesting to let people be more of a creative thinker as opposed to being a student that takes a textbook studies and passes an exam and goes off into a job. So I try to encourage saying to have more of a creative and open mind, right? So over the past, I would say 8 years or so, that's been something that I've really, really enjoyed doing. Is in some ways I would like to say creating entrepreneurs.
Hmm. And talking about entrepreneurship, you've mentioned one of the. So I'd like to go more in depth into one of your companies. Circle 24, you said is one of your most successful startups. What is it? Yeah, what is the startup? Would you say?
So Circle 24 went through quite a bit of changes and variations. In some ways, it was like my first entry into startups. Basically, I mean, I had a few before that, but Circle 24 basically started initially doing software development. And in some ways, when I look back at the company, we were one of the first companies to do offshore development
What year was it?
around 2000, right? So if you go back in time and you take a look, that was when software development overseas was just coming into play. And we had to actually have a dedicated line between San Francisco and India, which cost quite a bit of money just to upload and download software, right? So that was kind of the first time I got started on it. And then I was a little fortunate to take advantage of the internet boom, right? That's when the dot-com boom came along. So we were perfectly timed for that particular time period where we were allowed to go in and basically build multiple websites, and we had a pretty big team of engineers in India. It was painful because we couldn't get software back and forth easily, especially updates and things like that. But that was pretty a good time to do offshore development, and in some ways now when I look back, I kind of regret I gave it up because once the internet, the dot-com era collapsed, I through a little bit of one of the projects that I did was for a company that did voice over IP implementation. And as a result of that, I got a project doing some voice over IP software development, which eventually led to us building our own voice over IP platform.
Voice over.
Voice over IP.
Well, what is voice over IP?
Voice over IP, I mean, obviously for the younger generation, right? It's all about the cell phones and making calls over that. But those days, the traditional phone lines, right? Used to make a phone call over a traditional phone line or an analog line. And voice over IP was the first phone calls that were made over the internet,
Wow.
right? So that was the first creation of basically almost like saying free phone calls, right? Earlier we used to pay 5 cents a minute, 7 cents a minute, and that's how the phone companies made their money. But Cisco Systems was one of the first in companies or large corporations to introduce voice over IP, where corporations could now make phone calls over the internet, which significantly cut their cost of telecommunications.
Mm.
So it's going back a while. I date myself quite a bit, but that was when voice over IP came about. And the telephone systems that you traditionally see on your desk where people picked it up and made phone calls, now when they picked it up and made a phone call, it went over the internet. So especially if you're doing international calling or even domestic calling across multiple cities, the calls were significantly cheaper because it was purely internet traffic.
And talking about that, I think there's some relevance to the AI thing, where it's a new technology and you have to learn it, right? And this AI is developing this new technology. How would you say you went about learning this new technology and building these companies at a time when it wasn't that well known?
So what was interesting is, I'll just give you a little bit of a backstory on that, on this particular thing. So when voice over IP first came into play, right, companies were starting to enter that market, and the two big players were Cisco Systems and Avaya, right? So they were kind of the two companies that introduced the technology into the market. Cisco kind of became the market leader. They had to basically educate the market as to what this was all about, or what was voice over IP. So in this particular case, when one of the people that I did a project for, he basically gave me a phone, a Cisco phone, and said, hey, this is a phone, it has a screen, and you can basically put a couple of applications on it, right? So think about life without a cell phone, right? So
Crazy.
great, right?
For me.
You probably even can't imagine it, but this had a nice little screen on the phone, and it was black and white, eventually turned into color, and now you could run apps on it. You could actually check horoscope, you could check flight information, you could check stock market, right? I mean, this was kind of new and cool because we were traditionally used to the PC for everything. So once this phone got introduced, here was a new device that you could have on your desk, which became an alternate for a PC, right? So it was a telephone with a screen, and it was almost like a mini computer, if you kind of look at it that way. And Cisco started introducing this into the market. So when somebody gave me a phone, one of my friends gave me a phone and said, hey, see what you can build with this. And since the .com had started to collapse, I sent that phone off to India. We kind of hacked the software a little bit, right? I didn't, but we got the software hacked, sent it off to India, and we ended up having the team in India see what they could do in terms of applications. So the team in India actually put some applications together. Believe it or not, it was a horoscope application and a stock market application where you could check the stock on your phone. And so we got it back. And now I was looking at this and going, oh, this is the coolest thing. But I had no idea how to take it to Cisco and show it to them, right? Because I didn't know anybody at Cisco, and they wouldn't give me the time or day to even go in and talk to them. So what was interesting is Cisco used to go around the San Francisco Bay Area in a big truck, and they had all the equipment in the truck, and they used to go to various hotels, and they used to invite people for voice over IP seminars and to talk about what the technology was all about, and the phones, and not so much the screens, but basically introducing this voice over IP technology. So I decided to follow the truck. So I used to get in my car and follow the truck and see which hotel they went into, and then go in and watch their seminar and then try to get their attention. So I used to walk up to the engineers and go, hey, I got something to show you. Most of the time they just basically ignored me and said, go away, right, from that standpoint. But I didn't give up. I went to the next seminar and the next hotel, next seminar and the next hotel. So I went to about 4 or 5 of them. Eventually they got kind of tired of seeing me and said, why are you here, right? You're not going to buy your technology. I said, yeah, I'm here because I want to show you something which your phones could do. And so then they finally asked me, I said, yeah, I'm coming here for the free cookies and Coke, right? Basically that they were showing. So finally, after about 5 times they'd seen me, one of the engineers said, okay, we've seen you enough. We'll give you some time on Friday afternoon at our sales meeting, engineering meeting. Come and show us what you have. So I was thrilled, right? I went for the meeting, took a laptop, took one of their phones, and I said, here, look at what your phones can do. And believe it or not, the system engineers at Cisco had no idea that their phones could actually do that. Right? They were only selling voice traffic. And when I showed them the applications and what they could do, they go, we had no idea that our phones could do this. So as soon as I did that and showed it to them, that was like opened up their eyes, and my life changed completely from that day onwards, because next thing you know, Cisco jumped onto this, because as much as they was trying to sell internet traffic or phone calls over the internet, this became the icing on the cake, because now that phone could do a lot more than just phone calls where you could run a whole series of applications.
So you sort of introduced software.
Basically introduced applications. If you go back to what you would see on a phone right now, we started introducing applications onto the phone. Right, and just talking about it a little bit further, we ended up building applications for hospitalities, for hotels, for healthcare, for education programs, for law firms. Right, we started building. Most of them were demos because Cisco was pushing us, but obviously what was nice was Cisco kept us alive by paying us to build.
And is that Circle 24?
That was Circle 24.
Wow.
And it turned into we changed it from Circle 24 Systems to Circle 24 Technologies. And we ended up building this whole series of applications on the phone. And I went from not knowing anybody at Cisco to now kind of going all the way up to their CEO, John Chambers, where he started showcasing and demoing our software as well. And it was quite the ride with Cisco, and there's quite a bit of stories on this. Cisco took us pretty much all over the world with that technology, which was a part of their system. So as much as we built demos for them for mostly, subsequently one of our demos turned into quite the application for the legal industry. And that's what basically changed the dynamics of the company and turned us into a real business. So
For law?
for law firms, yeah.
What kind of software?
So then again,
Yeah.
it probably dates you, right, in terms of time. When lawyers pick up the phone and make a call, typically they have to bill for their time, right? So they have to basically say, we spoke to this client for 15 minutes, an hour, whatever. Time and billing is their life. But when Cisco introduced the phones, Cisco left that feature out, the time and billing feature on the phones. Right, so basically the way it works is that a lawyer picks up the phone and they dial their client, and they have to enter an account code. So they need to know when they spoke to that client and for how long. And not only did they charge for the time, they also charged for the phone call. So in other words, let's say they talk for 10 minutes, they would charge 50 cents. So it was for the phone call plus the time. And Cisco released this, and Cisco pushed it into the law firms, but Cisco didn't have this underlining feature. So one of the demos that we had built for account codes, subsequently out of the blue, Cisco called us and said, hey, we just sold it into a law firm. Law firm bought the product. They don't have the software, so that demo that you showed us, can you give it to them? And it turned out into a real product. And what was pretty cool about it was once we got it working, I mean, we had our challenges to make sure it worked as an actual application. At one time, we had the top 25 law firms in the world using the product.
Wow.
So it took us in a completely different direction, unexpected, right? You just never know what to expect, especially when you go into startups and now the common term is pivoting, but at that time we didn't know what that was called. And so that's how kind of that whole idea of startups, and that was the journey of it. And in some ways, looking back, I had a pretty good acquisition offer when I had that company, and the company with this technology was only about a year old. And instead of selling the company, the people around me said, hey, if this company is willing to buy you, if you spend a little bit of money, if you raise venture capital, they'll pay 100 times the price. And instead of me exiting at a pretty decent price at the start, I decided I'm going to go out and raise venture capital and grow the company and raise a bigger team and things like that and go big. In hindsight, I should have taken that first little exit and walked away and then gone on to build other companies.
So that would be a lesson for young founders.
That would be a lesson, and I teach that in all my classes today. Going, if somebody made an offer, would you take it? Now there are lots of lessons learned. Like, I mean, I know that Facebook got an offer from Yahoo for about $1 billion, and they turned it down. And Facebook went on, obviously, where they are today. I think they're like 1.3 trillion or something like that today. But for young startups, sometimes having a small little success in the bag can take you a long way as well. Because the reason why I didn't do that, I mean, I had no idea about startups. I had no idea about venture capital. I had no idea about board of directors. I was completely new to the space. And that was a hell of a lesson that I learned. And that is something that I continue to teach today as to what happens in a startup, what goes on in a startup, how it works, what things to be aware of. So that lesson to date is still applicable to a lot of the things that I went through in that, which I basically incorporated as a part of what I teach today in my classes. So.
There was the internet boom, and you've experienced it firsthand. How was it, and yeah, how did it go? Because I think it has a lot of relevance to AI with its meteoric rise and perhaps its boom.
I mean, that internet boom was wild. I mean, it was just absolutely a crazy time. I don't think we would ever see something like that ever again.
Really? Oh,
Yeah, you would never see something like that. Because I'll give you an idea. In the valley, right, money was being thrown around like you wouldn't even understand how much money was being thrown around. A lot of the startups, it was who had the biggest launch party.
really?
Right? So it's like, oh, we got 25 million today and we spent $1 million on our launch party. They were renting out warehouses to run these launch parties, and money was being thrown around like crazy. And for good reason, because the stock market was booming, right? You went from your company being $20 to $300 in 3 weeks, right? So there was no such thing as money. People had no sense of it, and the money came in and the money went out, right? So I don't think we'll ever see something like that again. And so it obviously gave rise to some amazing companies, right? The Googles, the Amazons of the world basically came out of that. But then there was a whole bunch of companies that didn't last 2-3 years and they just crashed and burned, but at the same time made a hell of a lot of money too.
And what do you think was the reason why some companies survive and some companies did not survive?
I think a lot of the companies that survived, like if you take a look at the likes of an Amazon or the Googles of the world, they kind of looked for it long term. They kind of built it for the long term. The people were there. They had a big vision. That's what they wanted to do. Whereas a lot of the startups was like, let's do something. We got an idea. We'll pitch. We'll get a check next week, or not even next week. In 2 days, build this thing, sell it in 6 months, or get acquired and move on, right? So there was no such thing as a long-term thing. It was basically short-term. You dug for gold, you found the gold, you sold the gold, and you moved on. So it was everything was very fast and very quick. I mean, to give you an example, literally on a daily basis, you walk into a sports club, you'll have 10, 15 people sitting down with their checkbooks, and guys and gals would come in and pitch their ideas, and they will write $1,000 check, right, just to get in early, because everybody thought if you wrote $1,000 check into the companies that it would turn into gold in a couple of months. So literally all the Silicon Valley athletic clubs would host these evenings. And who would host the evenings? The tennis coach. The tennis coach would get a couple of people and he would host Silicon Valley investment in startups. So it was just unreal. And all you had to do was come up with an idea and you would get a check.
And do you think it's relevant to AIs right now with a lot of
No,
AI?
like I said, I
Really?
don't think you will see a boom like that.
So it's not even comparable.
Not even compared. Because what you see in today's market, right? I mean, if you take a look at the companies, AI companies, or whatever the boom might be, right? I mean, we have to turn and say, like if you look at a couple of people and if you look at the industry in general, you would turn and say internet was the biggest boom, right? To an extent, gave rise to obviously a lot younger, but you would know that. But I mean, the internet was the big boom. Then you could turn and say the other revolution was probably cell phones, right? From that standpoint. And now, if you look at the third one, you would say it's AI, right? So with ChatGPT or OpenAI coming up here in about a little over a year ago, that was the third biggest boom. But the difference is today, I mean, you see AI. If you don't put AI in your startup, or if you don't talk about it, people are not going to take you seriously, right? Because you have to have AI. But the biggest difference is today, if you went out to raise capital or if you did anything, you have to show something. You have to show a product, you have to show what it's capable of, even have customers before you get that check, right? Check written to you. So money is very tight now, right? It's not like you pitch an idea and you get a check, right? You're not going to the athletic club and talking about an idea and people are not writing you $1,000 check. Yes, there are websites now, crowdfunding websites that can do those things, but it doesn't happen at that speed at all. Not even close, right? By the time you raise a seed round, you're looking at 3 to 6 months. A Series A, you're looking at 2 years to raise it. Those days, you're looking at that Series A was pretty much a month or 2 months. Right, so money was a different story. The money was being thrown around, and the stock market is, yeah, I mean, at that time it was pretty high in terms of during that time, but the valuations of the companies was just mind-boggling, right? It's nothing compared to that right now. I don't think, like I said, there would never be a time like that, no matter what technology is going to come in. Because the investors are very, they don't just write checks anymore. So.
And just moving on, you're the founder of Think Tomi. It helps consult students, startup founders build a better startup. What would you say are your key insights you've learned from your journey that you pass on to people?
So some of the things that, when I love to teach, right? It's been a passion of mine for now. So I've been teaching for about 8 years. I got the opportunity to teach at St. Mary's in their MBA program in San Francisco, or I should say Moraga, California, right? I ended up teaching a class there, and I kind of found my passion for teaching. And then I decided after teaching that class, it's time for me to go out and launch an education company. And that's what I ended up doing with Think Tomi. And I had lots of ideas in terms of building a school or even going out and building a university. To basically, at that time, one of the differences when I taught that MBA class was I didn't use a textbook, which was kind of against the norm in the university. I kind of brought in real life experience, and that's made the big difference in the program and the class. It was pretty well ranked because it was more of a real life journey as opposed to a textbook journey. And that's what gave me the idea, saying there's an opportunity to teach real life experiences to people who are interested in learning about what goes on in companies, because trust me, I don't think there's a textbook that carries that real life experience. So that's what led me to the idea to launch an education company. But I also tend to have a weakness for travel. So the idea that I wanted to build this school out and build out these experiences, I got a little bit sidetracked with an opportunity to come to Korea and teach a class. And then that little idea led me to going to Brazil. I was invited to go to Brazil and teach, to do a talk there. And I had the opportunity to go to the World Cup, which they took me for, to Brazil. Then over a lunch meeting, I got the opportunity to go to Chile and teach, right? So I was like, to hell with the school. One of my biggest passions is to travel. And as a result of that, I decided, I'm just going to travel the world and teach, right? So that's what led me to more of an international teaching experience. And like life would have it, I've seen you never know what tomorrow will bring. And basically it led me to Korea to teach, to get introduced to a bunch of startups here. It took me a while to get started. It was not easy, right? Because it's like, who is this guy coming here to tell us what's going on in the valley and things like that. But over a period of time, when I started relating some of my experiences with startups and what it takes to build these companies and things like that, little by little, I started getting engaged with the Korean startup ecosystem and with a lot of different government agencies and universities and things like that. That gave me the opportunity to teach startups. And that led to the same thing with the universities as well. I teach at Harrisburg University of Science and Technology in Philadelphia. I teach 2 classes there. So this entrepreneurship teaching kind of opened up a whole new set of opportunities and things like that, helping people basically come up with the ideas.
And do you help them throughout their process? You obviously help them throughout the process.
I help them throughout the process, depending on how far they want to take it, right? I even joke in my classes because my classes are generally pretty full, right, when I teach in the university. And I used to joke saying, why do you guys take this class? Because I grade easy. They go, yeah, you might grade a little bit easier, but you make us think.
Think,
right?
Tomi.
Yeah, think. Right? Basically, you make us think. You force us to think of an idea. You force us to think of how you might take an idea and bring it to market. You force us to think how you might take an idea and sell it. You force us to think how you might raise money for your idea. And you even force us to think what you might do to exit. Right? So it's a thinking process that we go through during the summer that they find it pretty helpful and useful.
What do you think are the key mistakes people might make in their entrepreneurship journey from your teachings?
Well, one of the things that I would basically turn around and say is that a lot of entrepreneurs, right, and you see this whether it's in South Korea or in the United States or wherever. What's the goal? We came up with this idea. Goal number 2 is we need funding, right? So it's the entire idea is funding driven. And a lot of them basically tend to think that the day they get a check, that they made it. Somebody bought into the idea and life is amazing and things like that. And I always turn and say, that's the day in a few years from now, you're going to look back and go, I shouldn't have done that. Right, even for me personally, when we raised our Series A, we asked for 3, we got 10. And I was in New York when the VCs agreed to it, and it was like, oh my God, we made it. But in hindsight, that was like, today when I look back, that was the biggest mistake I made, taking that money.
And why would you say that's a big mistake, if you can go into it?
Yeah, the reason is because once you take that money, right? I mean, things are different now. I'm not saying no, right? VCs, generally venture capitalists, give you a little bit more flexibility in terms of build your vision out. And to be honest with you, there's a couple of venture capitalists like Peter Thiel and things like that encourage founders, right, to continue to build that vision and continue to build your company. But in those days, some of the venture capital mentality was, okay, thanks for giving us the idea, now step aside. And we'll bring in the executive team to build and run this company. And then you kind of realize after a while that they completely lose sight of the goal and the vision for the company, right? So in this particular case, it's like, okay, so like in this particular case, well, the legal industry is not that sexy. So we need to dump it and move into another industry. And I was like, well, no, we built this company, there's a lot of money here, but it was like, no, let's go after the finance industry, in this particular case. And there was no opportunity in the finance industry for this particular product. So to an extent, the VCs determined where you should go and what you should do. And they kind of didn't let the founders build it out. Right? So that was a mistake. Like in my particular case, when that happened, myself and a couple of engineers got together and we ended up building a product for the Department of Defense. And that became the shining light at the end of it as well. But then again, it was done as a side project. So a lot of it, to an extent, is a lot of the VCs generally today, they give you a little bit more flexibility and they leave it in the founders to build the company. Those days, it was a lot different.
So would you still recommend that founders get funding, VC funding?
The founders can get VC funding, right? But one of the things that there's nothing wrong with getting VC funding, but and you need it. There's no doubt you need the capital to build your company. But if that's your end goal and if you're building the company just for funding, it's not easy. And then you kind of lose sight of what you're trying to build, because people might write you a check, and if you get the check, they can push you into a different direction. Sometimes what I generally trying to say is, don't go after the funding so much. Go build your product. Yes, raise a little bit of money here and there. Try and build it through customer funding. Go and get your customer acquisition. Because if you do that, trust me, the VCs will find you. Right? The VCs will find you. As opposed to you knocking on their door, you want them to knock on your door. And if you look at some of the companies that have gone to Grim Up, one of the examples I use right now, there's this founder, his name skips my mind, but it's the company's Athletic Greens. And if you listen to that story and you listen to that founding story, it's just incredible, because that entire company was built on influencer marketing. And he raised $100 million after he did $150 million in sales. Right? And now you give up 10% of the company, not 40 to 50 to 60 to 70% of the company. Right? So focus on building the company, not just funding. Just go out and acquire those customers or find your paid customers. And it's almost like saying, can you build your company through customer funding, as opposed to being just bent on just raising VC money. Right? Raising VC money doesn't mean that you have made it. That is, because think about it, even the VC-backed companies, only 20% make it. Right? So even 80% fail. Right? So it's not about the funding. It's about, if you're strong about building your company, then that's what you want to do.
And you already mentioned one of like the business success stories of Athletic Greens. What would you say are other entrepreneurs that you would look up to and recommend other people listen to for advice and for wisdom?
So one of the things that which we generally tend to see, right? And I'm just talking about some of the things that I even teach or kind of hear about these days. So if you take a look at the Amazons of the world, right? If you take a look at PayPal, like Peter Thiel and things like that, and if you turn around and say, what is their kind of the recipe for success, right? If you take Yelp and if you take a look at a lot of these companies. So if you take Amazon, for example, and if you turn around and say, Amazon, right? We know what they do today. They're pretty much in every industry you can think of. They have either bought a company or they have a hand in it, right? Other companies are absolutely afraid of Amazon. And if you think about it, if you think about when Amazon started, they sold books for 3 years. 3 years, they only sold books. And they were the earth's largest bookstore. So what they did was they picked a beachhead market. They identified one market. They stuck with that market. They dominated that market. And that domination eventually, once they built that and they dominated the market and they knocked out all the other booksellers, so everybody who thought about a book went to Amazon. After they did that for 3 years, then in the fourth year, they introduced DVDs and CDs, and then literally gradually introduced the Kindle and things like that. But that initial focus and that beachhead market plays a massive role in the success of a lot of companies, right? And generally, a lot of the top venture capitalists, they look for that in a lot of companies, right? So, and the reason being, so even if you take a look at Facebook, I mean, we think of Facebook, it's used all around the world, but where did Facebook start? Where did Facebook focus? They focused 100% on universities, right? They didn't go anywhere else. They focused on universities, and then they dominated the market. Rest is history, right? If you take a look at PayPal, and Peter Thiel has a little video clip on YouTube that says, where did PayPal go first? They went on eBay and they focused on 22,000 users, right? So it's just that it's that initial focus, that initial beachhead market, that domination, that beachhead market. Once you get it and you dominate the market, the rest falls into place. Right, you see that with Bumble. Bumble, obviously, she was the founder from Tinder, right? She was in a relationship with the guy, I think, from Tinder, and then something happened there, and she left the company. But how did she take on Tinder? She went after the university market, right? So it's when you pick a niche market or a beachhead market, and you're able to dominate that market, amazing things that can happen to your company. And one of the simple reasons is you're a startup. You don't have the time, the money, and the resources and the people to go out and take on the world, right? But that domination in the market, establishing a credibility, acquiring your customers in the market, little by little leads to the magic in terms of building your company, right? So that is probably one of the biggest things that when you look at the success of a lot of companies, you start to see that trend emerge from that.
Focusing deep down and spending and having the patience to stick to that for years and years. And
Not
years.
even so much years, but it's like, when you enter the market, right? You're a startup. There is so many dominant players in the market. You're not going to wipe them out. They have a lot more money than you. They can just knock you out in a heartbeat. How do you take them on, right? How do you take those companies on? One of the ways you kind of take them on is pick a niche market, pick a small market, or what they call a beachhead market. Focus on a group of people, or depending on what your product it might be, even if it's a B2B, pick a market, focus on that market, capture 40% of that market, whatever you can. Once you have established yourself in that market, the rest falls into place, right? The rest allows you to go after the next market. And even if you come on to an Amazon, you think about it. They sold books for 3 years, then they had excess capacity, and they went on and created AWS, right? So it's that domination of that initial market and being known for something, or people know who you are and they kind of know, then it's a lot easier for you to introduce and go after other markets and kind of continue to build your company once you dominate a given market, right? So you generally see that as a part of a success for a lot of good startups that have kind of come out into.
And just a personal question. I'm a student, I'm a young entrepreneur. Where do you think young entrepreneurs should go? Do you think they should go to Silicon Valley or other countries to build their own startups? Do you think it matters or not?
In this day and age, I don't think it matters, right? I really don't think it matters because you find, for example, there are a couple of entrepreneurs, for example, they look at the valley, right? And you find this in Europe and even South America. They look at the valley, see what the successful startups are in the valley, and they basically duplicate the idea in different regions, right? Now, yes, Silicon Valley is sexy, Silicon Valley has a name, Silicon Valley is hot, and I always tell even the people here in South Korea, Silicon Valley, when you come and pitch an idea, nobody writes you a check in 2 minutes, right? It's you have to compete with everybody else. But one of the differences is it doesn't matter which part of the world you're in, right? If you look at the startups in India, I mean that's a massive market, 1.8 billion people. That's a huge market, and you see some of the Indian startups that are there and their valuation and things like that because they are serving a big market. You're not going to get that kind of a valuation in the valley because obviously the market is a lot smaller. There is money, but yeah, and there are VCs in the valley that will write you a check in India. But there are so many markets around the world that there is a tremendous amount of opportunity. And you can say Silicon Valley, yes, Silicon Valley is good for new ideas and people are being creative and things like that. But a lot of established places, or I should say not, a lot of the countries, there is enough population for you to come up with an idea and build there, right? And once you do that and you have some success, I mean, there's a lot of places that you can go to. Like I said, the VCs will find you, right? Look at Indonesia, there's GoCheck, right? What do? It's kind of that Uber service to an extent on motorbikes, right? You go to Africa, there's M-Pesa out of Kenya that came out, which was a way to transfer money, right? So like that, you can dominate in certain areas. Yeah, it's always nice to come to the valley and things like that, but it's not easy in the valley, and the valley is crazy expensive.
How do you know when a startup idea is good or bad, and how do you go about determining the right startup idea?
Like, I mean, I'll give you a quick example. So one of my students recently happened to be from Mongolia, right? And she and I were talking about different ideas and things like that. So she goes, "Oh, I'm going back to Mongolia because I think there's an opportunity to do a startup there." And I'm not sure whether I should say this or not, but she was saying credit rating, right? In the US, we have credit rating, right? We have the FICO and Vantage, and that's how they determine whether people give out loans. And that doesn't really exist in Mongolia. So it was like, I have the knowledge, I have the experience, I know how to do this, I have the algorithms, so I can maybe go out there and build that system, right? So that's where you see opportunity.
So there should be a specific pain point you're kind of
It's a
talking.
specific pain point, and a lot of the countries in the world are not there yet, right? I mean, for the local people and things like that, there are a lot of ideas that you can be specific to a given market that you can get. You know, it's not easy to just hop on a plane and go to the valley. I mean, it's not that simple. But if you're that true entrepreneur, in your own backyard, there's a lot of things that you can do there too.
And talking about startup, this is something. There's a lot of struggle, and there's a lot of some mistakes and failures that may happen across the journey. I have young friend. All of my friends, they're building startups. All of them feel the same thing, and you've probably experienced them, and you've already said you've experienced. How do you go about going through those moments and continuing and on?
So one of the things I will say, so I always get this question, and I ask my students, what do you think is your biggest challenge in a startup, right? So people go, it's a product, it's no money, it's venture funding, it's finding a customer, all that stuff. Yes, you have to do all those things. That's just a part of the startup. But I personally think, in all my years of experience, the hardest thing you'll ever face in a startup is the people. And what do I mean by that, right? You have your co-founders. Trust me, you'll never see eye to eye on many things, right? But it's up to your co-founders and you to figure out what that relationship is. Sometimes, I have a lawyer, he always basically says, money makes people funny, right? So in other words, if you think you have more equity than another co-founder and the other co-founder says, but I'm working harder than you, right? There are co-founder issues, right? You get co-founder fights. There's even Silicon Valley therapy that handles co-founders.
Really?
Yeah, there's therapy for co-founders, right? I happen to know of a startup that basically after they got funding, one of the co-founders was not very happy because he had less equity, and they started fighting, and the VC pulled out the money and shut the company down. Right? Yeah. So people, right? So what else with people? So co-founders. Then you as a founder now have to deal with employees, right? Or people who work with you. They come with all types of, right? It's not like everyone that you get is going to be amazing. You have also this theory they call the brilliant jerk who is in your company, right? So somebody who's amazing but cannot get along with people. So do you keep the person or do you let that person go, right? That's one. Now you have a customer that you have to manage, right? The customer doesn't like you. The customer is complaining. This doesn't work. That doesn't work, right? You have to manage the customer. Then you potentially a partner, right? That's again another people. You have to keep all these people happy. And more so than anything else, if you raise money and things like that, you have to manage up. You have to manage your board of directors, right? They are looking, they are keeping an eye out for you, going, what are you doing? How come you didn't sell? How come you didn't close the deal? You promised us this, right? You have to do that. You have to pay attention to all the regulations that go on, right? The government will come after and go, but you didn't pay your taxes on this, right? So it's not just simply about the product, it's everything that surrounds you that becomes quite the journey. And if you boil it down, it always boils down to people.
And how do you think you can learn those skills of managing people?
I mean, you're going to have it. I don't think you can, like even for me, I've been through, I don't know, 6 or 7 startups. I think every time I do a startup or get involved in a startup, I think I have figured it out. But nope, you come across a new set of people and it's a different set of problems, right? It's like, oh, I'm smarter than you. Or I know I've been in corporations for a long time, so I know a lot more than you. I know how to build companies. But then you find out that they have not been through a startup, right? You have to take the garbage out and you have to do so many other things, and they're not used to certain things like that, right? So to an extent, it's something that you learn along the way, but you have to be ready for that journey, right? So I always tell a lot of the people who are doing these startups, look here, you're going to face this problem as you build the company. And this is something that you have to deal with. If you take the likes of the biggest companies in the world and if you dig a little bit deeper into their history, you'll find out that they all had the same thing. There's no difference. From Elon Musk, you'll read a little bit of his story at PayPal. You'll be surprised what he went through there too.
Mark Zuckerberg.
Mark Zuckerberg from Facebook, right? Google had a couple of challenges too. Tinder.
And recently OpenAI.
OpenAI, right? The board saga, right? That's another thing, right? One of the things that you always have to worry about with a startup is who controls the board of directors, right? So that is another huge thing that you have to be aware of. So as a part of the startup journey, it's not about creating your product. Yes, that's what you want to do. But as a founder or a co-founder in the company, there are a lot of things that you have to worry about. And it always surrounds, it's always around people somewhere. So that is something that you have to be ready for as you kind of embark on the journey. So,
Manoj, I'm so thankful for your time, and this is the last question I ask all my guests: is if you could travel back in time to when you were 17, what would you tell yourself?
So it's interesting. Like I think I briefly mentioned to you, I have an 18-year-old and a 20-year-old, right? So what do I tell them? Not that they listen to me, right? But I think one of the things that I always tell myself, which I could have done, is, and I tell this to both my kids, network. So what I mean by that is build your network, right? Because and there's a saying that says your network is your net worth, right? So a lot of people go to universities like Stanford or things like that. Are you going to Stanford because you think it's the best education in the world? Not really, because they have an incredible network, right? If you get into the Stanford network, is huge to an extent. So the network is massive, and the more you can kind of pay attention. I'm not saying everybody that you meet in your network is going to be of incredible amount of help to you, but 20%, you go at the 80-20 rule, build your network, meet people, just continue to do that, be aware of it, because you never know where that next door is going to open, right? That's one. The second thing is don't close, be aware that things can change, right? Tomorrow it could be a different day. You could bump into someone who could change your life tomorrow, right? So be aware of that. And I think one of the lessons I would like to turn and say is, even with my kids now, I mean, I wish there was a lot of things that I knew at that time. Like, for example, I still go back when I first came into education and Microsoft went public, right? It's like, oh, I should have taken $1,000 and bought Microsoft stock, right? And looked at it for the long run, for example. So a lot of it is, even if you're young, put some money away, right? Even if it's $50 a month, just put it away. Just have some of those simple habits and put it away, right? And so that when you get older and when you continue to build, you're going to go through hard times in life. It's not going to be, I'm going to be the next billionaire or I'm going to create the next unicorn. You're going to have challenges, ups and downs and failures and things like that. But having simple discipline like that can go a long way in having some stability in fighting the ups and downs of life, right? So that is something I try to tell my kids too, is like, just put something away. It doesn't have to be much, but you'll be surprised how it builds up. Even if it's buying $50 worth of Amazon stock a month, it doesn't matter. Just simple things like that can make a big difference as you go through life, right? I look back and I go, I wish I knew some of those things, just to build a little bit more stability as you go through the journey of life. So.
Mm. Well, that's a lovely way of ending it. I'm so thankful for your time, Manoj. Thank you for your time. It was a pleasure hosting you.